Have you ever seen a headline like this? So-and-so finally arrested for abuse. Justice served. Or a viral tweet demanding someone be locked up with the hashtag #accountability now? It feels satisfying, like something real is being done. But what if the very system we're calling on isn't built to protect the people it claims to serve? This is the story of carceral feminism, a version of feminism that seeks justice through police, prisons, and punishment. And it's a story that reveals how easy it is to confuse punishment with progress. Carceral feminism isn't some internet term. It's a real framework, coined by scholars like Elizabeth Bernstein to describe the alignment between feminist movements and the carceral state. In other words, a belief that the best way to fight gender-based violence is to criminalize it more harshly. And at first glance, that sounds like common sense. Stricter laws, longer sentences, more arrests. Who wouldn't want abusers held accountable? But here's the problem. This approach assumes that the criminal justice system is fair, unbiased, and actually works, when in reality, it often fails the very women it claims to protect. Historically, carceral feminism gained traction in the US during the 1980s and 1990s. At the same time, the country was ramping up the war on drugs and expanding mass incarceration. As domestic violence and sexual assault gained more public attention, feminists began pushing for legal reforms, mandatory arrests, longer prison terms, registries, and tougher sentencing. But in doing so, many advocates unintentionally aligned with the same carceral logic that fuels mass incarceration, a system disproportionately harming Black, brown, poor, immigrant, and queer communities. Instead of dismantling systemic harm, carceral feminism often reinforces it by turning to the state as the primary source of justice. Let's pause here. Imagine a woman calls the police to report her abusive partner, but instead of protection, she's met with suspicion, dismissal, or even arrested herself, especially if she's undocumented, trans, Black, or doesn't speak English fluently. This isn't hypothetical. It happens all the time. Police and prisons weren't designed to care for survivors. They were designed to control populations. Yet carceral feminism assumes that survivor safety equals more punishment. And in doing so, it ignores the ways that state violence and gendered violence often overlap. Even worse, the system is selective. Rich, white, well-connected men often avoid consequences altogether, while poor and marginalized people face the full weight of the law for lesser offenses. And when the feminist movement centers punishment as its primary solution, it risks reinforcing the same structures of racialized control that feminists once fought to dismantle. It also places survivors in the impossible position of relying on institutions that have historically failed them, or even harmed them. So why does this keep happening? Because in a world where justice feels scarce and pain feels invisible, punishment feels powerful. Arrest someone, sentence them, cancel them, erase them. It gives the illusion of closure without changing the system that allowed the harm in the first place. And social media only amplifies this logic, creating a digital culture where outrage is instant, accountability is reduced to punishment, and nuance gets drowned out by viral sound bites. In this way, carceral feminism isn't just a legal or academic issue. It's become a cultural reflex, one that shows up in our feeds, in our politics, and in how we define justice itself. You can see it in hashtags. Me Too. For Believe Women, Lock Him Up. What started as a movement to amplify survivors' voices quickly became entangled in a culture of digital punishment, where outrage is instant, complexity is lost, and the demand for justice becomes a demand for retribution. And while some of that is absolutely justified, especially in a world that routinely silences victims, it raises a difficult question. Is punishment the same thing as justice? Because in many cases, the call for someone to be cancelled, fired, or arrested is less about transforming the systems that allowed abuse, and more about removing one bad actor, as if the problem ends there. This is what carceral logic looks like in digital form. React fast, punish hard, move on. And in the process, the same patterns of selective accountability play out online, with white, attractive abusers often escaping consequences, while marginalized people get permanently labeled as dangerous, even without due process. Here's where abolitionist feminism comes in. Instead of asking, how can we punish abusers more effectively? It asks, how can we create a world where abuse is less likely to happen in the first place? It centers prevention, healing, and community-based accountability over punishment. It recognizes that survivors need support, housing, healthcare, and safety nets, not just police reports. And it understands that throwing people into prisons doesn't make them safer. It often just moves the violence around. Think about how society treats parenting, caregiving, poverty, or addiction. Rather than asking what supports people need, we reach for punishment. A mother can lose her kids for being poor. A victim of abuse can be jailed for defending herself. A person in crisis can be met with guns instead of mental health care. This isn't protection, it's control. And feminism that reinforces control over care isn't liberation. It's repackaged oppression. Carceral feminism also diverts resources. Every dollar spent on policing could be spent on housing survivors, trauma therapy, rape crisis centres, or public education about consent and relationships. But when punishment becomes the default response to harm, everything else gets defunded, and the root causes of violence remain untouched. It's a cycle. Harm happens, we punish, nothing changes, and social media can make this cycle worse. Because platforms reward outrage. They reward black and white thinking. They reward content that simplifies, shames, and goes viral, not content that digs deeper. You can see this anytime a celebrity gets called out or someone's mugshot circulates with 2 million likes. The question is rarely, what happened? It's, who do we punish? And once that person is punished, we pretend the problem is solved. But what if the problem isn't the individual? It's the system. Justice doesn't have to mean punishment. It can mean repair. It can mean safety. It can mean building something that doesn't rely on violence to stop violence. Feminism isn't about locking up more people. It's about imagining a world where fewer people are harmed to begin with. That requires more than hashtags. It requires more than carceral logic. It requires a shift, away from retribution and toward collective care. Because true justice isn't measured by how many people we punish. It's measured by how many people we protect before the harm ever happens.